color, black men, black women that get in positions of power, we know the temperature and the atmosphere of this country. We know in a lot of places, as from the gentleman earlier, that a lot of people don't see race. That means that since they don't see race, that we are invisible, and that we should be aware of that when we get in positions of power, and just to be more careful. And I think Derek Foxworth was an example of that. And I hope other people will learn from that. So that's my comment.
So, Aaron, I wanted to ask you a question. What was the study that was done on the Oregonian by you and Padine? What was that called? Do you remember?
Coloring in the News.
Okay, so I just wanted to bring this study that was, when was it, 2000? Not too long ago.
2003.
Okay, so the group of professors and grad students did a study on the Oregonian. I think this fits into the context of this discussion, and they just did it on crime and the representation of race according to crime. And in the Oregonian, the representation of crime regarding the proportion of black and white people in the city has consistently shown that they focus, even though black people make up a very small percentage of this population, the majority of articles focus on, well, not the majority of articles, but there's a disproportionate focus on black crime. And it's not just a small, it's like 23% of articles in this study were focusing on black crime, where black people only make up 5% of the population. So there is a bias, there's a clear bias within the Oregonian in terms of its coverage of issues and its relationship to race. And then I also just wanted to bring up, there's a case that I've just been following and that I think is in relation to this case. And I don't know if anybody's ever heard of Peter Cookson. Peter Cookson is the dean, or was the dean of Graduate School of Education at College of Lewis and Clark. High-level position. This guy, and he was also the director of the Portland Schools Foundation. In charge of what? He was in charge of the kind of the multicultural effort within the district, cultural competency. And he was recently found guilty of sexual harassment, and he wasn't forced to quit, and but he did resign. He did resign on his own. I mean, he was found guilty, and I don't think he was going to be able to teach there anymore because of that. But there was, as far as I know, I looked in the Oregonian, and there was not one coverage of this piece. I did found a piece in the Willamette, and then I was just thinking in terms of the coverage of a recent person, the guy who runs the cheerleading squad, Finger. And I mean, the coverage in comparison is minuscule. Granted, I think Foxworth's position is in much more of the limelight than both of these figures, but in terms of the coverage, it was scant in comparison. And I think that's what I want to get away from. It seems like some people want to argue about should we have demoted this guy or not. I really think it's just how does the press represent these issues? Is there, when a black and white woman are together and it's illicit, boom, it's exciting and people get hot for some reason. And I think Opio was telling us about the history. Why does this happen? Why do people get hot? And why do people buy it? Why do people get excited about it? And there's something in the history of this country that I think generates that excitement. And so I wanted to try to move away from guilt or innocence. And what does the mainstream press do? Look at what the black press did. If you look at, is anybody here from the Scanner or Observer? No. And if you look at their coverage of the case, it was much different. They focused on he wasn't found guilty of 7 charges. They focused on how important this person was to the black community in Portland. Those were the issues they focused on. They focused on the significance of race. What does this mean to the black community that this man was with a white woman and he wasn't supposed to be? They focused on these issues. We did look at the Oregonian. They did have a number of articles that did. But of 113 articles, we only found 3 that examined the significance of race, and particularly the issues that Opio brought up, right? So it's the story they told. I think the black press was concerned about what this means, because this means that, from my opinion, it means that all black men, that it perpetuates the stereotype that black men are capable of this more than other people. That's what it perpetuates, because this came out over and over and over again. And the black press wasn't telling that story. They were saying, man, this means a lot to us. This is an important person to our community. And he was hit very hard in the Oregonian and the Willamette. I know you had a question. You still want to ask a question? And then we'll get in the back. We'll move here. I'll try to keep order in terms of people.
For the gentleman from the Oregonian, I guess I want to preface what I have to say with it. It is really hard to be the minority in a room and feel like you're getting bombarded from all angles by people that don't agree with you. But I think what's harder might be accepting the fact that maybe we're not always right, especially as people in positions of power, as white males in society. It's a harder question for yourself to say, am I not right, than it is to sit in a room and contradict people. My question is, given Monica Lewinsky and Clinton, when that hit the media, it was about morals. It was made into a moral issue. People were not talking about sexism. So why is it that in this case, you mentioned when you were up there talking about his language and the treatment of women and made it about sexism only when it's not about racism? So where's the disconnect? Why does it become about sexism when race gets brought into the question? Why was it Monica Lewinsky about sexism and this is?
If I understand your question, it seems to me that there was an element of sexism in the Derek Foxworth story. When you have talking about submissive women, this bothers me a little bit. I know it bothered the women on our editorial board. I think at the time all white women. They were bothered mightily by it in a way that kind of was an oh wow moment for me. I found it a bit offensive, but certainly not as offensive. The Clinton thing, it seems to me, was about morality. It was about lying under oath, and it was about sex. And if we don't, I lived through it. I saw it. I was part of it. And it brings out, I think, the worst in journalists. I think it brings out the worst in human beings. Kind of reveling in the mess that people can make of themselves. And I think that was at play in Derek Foxworth's situation as well. Although well, there you have it. I'm happy to say I'm wrong when I think I'm wrong. I'm not going to do it to burnish my credentials, my sensitivity credentials up here. And, I'm 55 years old. I don't care anymore what people think. I think I've learned enough not to care. And I say this as a prelude to saying this. I may be insensitive to your issues here. And I come here knowing that you guys don't share a lot of my views. That would be true if I were in a group of white liberals. That just goes with the territory for me. But I want to say this to the woman who, in the brown sweater, who spoke so beautifully. You are not invisible to me. You are not invisible, and I care about what's going on in your neighborhoods with your kids. And I agree with you. There ought to be more attention paid to the good that's being done by these kids operating under terribly challenging circumstances. And I wish that were that were the case, I wish our schools did better by them. I don't think they do. But I am gonna, I've made a commitment in my life, and I made it at the time of the O.J. Simpson case, fiasco, that I was gonna speak honestly about race in my writings and in my dealings, however uncomfortable that might be. And you're gonna hear, I've heard things from you that I frankly didn't like to hear that much today. I hope you heard some things from me, because I think we need that. Because I'll tell you, and I think many of the white people in this room might agree with me on this, even the liberal ones. There are a lot of white people that just close down when the discussion comes to race, even white liberals. They don't want the aggravation. The worst thing you can be called, aside from a child abuser, is a racist. It just doesn't go away, and it's hard to prove elsewhere. Now, I'm in a position where I kind of have tenure at the Oregonian. I'm 55. I know what I'm about. I don't care. I'm going to tell you what I think, because I think we need to have this conversation. Because I do believe, I don't believe that race is involved in this particular case to the extent that y'all do. But I do believe that our racial problems are the number one domestic issue hurting this country. And I think honest talk is better than no talk.
I'm not going to go on, but I would just say a couple quick things. The question that I have for you, and I'll say the question first and then also all of you. In fact, it is for all of you. If you notice on Portland television right now, there are 3 black faces. That's it. There is Rhonda Barton, Shelby. Rhonda Barton's another friend of mine. Rhonda Shelby at Channel 2, who does the weather at Channel 2. You have Brenda Barton. Braxton. Brenda Braxton. Yeah. Thanks, Dave. Brenda Braxton at Channel 8, and she does the morning show. And then Ken Body, who does the weekend news. That's it. That's it. There's only one person who does any sort of reporting on the street right now, and that's Ken Body, and he only does it 3 days a week. I'm curious from all of you, all 4 of you, whether you think this particular story would have been treated differently had there been more black reporters in the mainstream media, not in the black press, because the black press is read by the black community. That's true, but not by the rest of the community generally. Would there have been a difference in the way this particular story was presented as a result of that? And I'm saying that because there are a couple of issues that come to mind for me. One is I am often curious when I was a reporter why sex was such a big story when there are so many other things going on. Why this? I mean, I could be very political about this. I guess I will be very political about this. The amount of the issue in terms of sex versus the issue in terms of Iraq is extraordinarily different. The lies that took place in terms of Bill Clinton versus the lies that have taken place regarding Iraq are extraordinarily different. And yet we spend an awful lot of time on that particular effort. And some folks have in fact made their careers based on that. It is a real concern of mine that it is not clear how much impact race and culture have on what is presented in the news. The large Hispanic population and Latino population in this city is all but ignored by the mainstream media. And that is a recipe for disaster when it comes to really working with people. So again, I'll go back. Would it have made a difference if there were more African Americans on the news, on the electronic newscast, as well as in the papers in this particular city?
Well, yes, and I think that goes without saying. It goes back to the original point that I was making. The people who write about the news determine what gets in the paper, what gets on television, how, and all the context. There are stories that do not get into the paper unless I write about them as a black woman. There are stories that don't get into the paper unless Nicole writes about it, unless Kim Milton writes about them. It's just the way that it is. We need more people of color working at the mainstream papers and on the television side. There's just things that, it's not that there is an intention of leaving people out. There's not that there's an intention of being racially insensitive. There was a drawing on a very good story that was written by a black reporter that, to me, was extremely offensive. But you know what? They didn't see it. They don't have my sensibility on certain issues. They just looked at it and didn't see it. I looked at it and I said, oh my God, why did we publish this? You're not gonna, everybody's coming in with their own point of view. And yeah, there needs to be a bigger variety of what's available as far as what our points of view are. And the people who are writing these stories and making the decisions, I don't believe that there are any black editors making the decisions and talking about that context. When I first came to the Oregonian, I was like the only black editor in the room when some of these decisions were made. And I tell you, it's a burden sometimes to be a black history lesson every day you walk up in that. And so, I'd love to share the burden a little bit, but we do need, and this is why I think it's essential, the point that I was making before. When we get it wrong, call us on it, speak up, get on our face, make some phone calls, write some letters to the editor, because we're not going to get it right every time. We don't have the manpower to get it right every time. But we need the community coming back in our face about it when we get it wrong. We are going to get it wrong sometimes. And, and it's not because we're trying to get it wrong. It's we all have different ways of how we view the world. And I think that that's a positive thing. I don't think we all should be thinking the same way. And I think it is a brave thing for him to get up here and be, and talk about and defend his point of view. He has a valid, points, and it's all good. And I'm glad we're having this discussion, but absolutely, there needs to be more diversity of thought, and not just racial diversity, but also, income diversity, all kinds of things. And, and I think that the community needs to be our watchdog. The media is the watchdog, right? The community needs to be our watchdog, because we're not always going to get it right. We never have, historically. We just have not. So don't expect us to. Do your job as a community. You know what I'm saying? And because, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
Here, here.
The question, and I found interesting, was when is it about race? And I would like, and you said you worked in Washington, D.C.?
I have, yes.
Okay. Washington, D.C. is about race. The founding father of this country was a slave, trader, a racist, and had no regards to the humanity of certain people. People were black. Thomas Jefferson likewise. The founding fathers of this country, our children are still taught to honor a set of races. Our national heroes are racists. When is it about race? America is about race. We wouldn't have a capital city named after racists if it wasn't about race. We wouldn't have Thomas Jefferson memorialized nationally and printed on our money if he wasn't a racist. He didn't stand for anything but white supremacy. So it's all about race. And if you don't understand that or don't see it, I'm surprised.
Well, prepare to be surprised, and for this reason. I think you're right. I mean, those founders were failed, broken human beings, products of their age, products of their economics, just as much as you are.
Well, you could say that about Hitler.
Look, Yeah,
He's a product of his times.
well,
and
I
therefore-
think I'd say a lot different about.
Sure.
about this.
I would,
But can I just say something though? Even with the failings of those individuals, and some are worse than others, I think. Some freed their slaves, some didn't. They also provided what I believe, and I believe to this day, is a marvelous system that allowed ultimately for the redemption that this country that they gave birth to needed. And I'm not going to.
Well, they gave birth to an apartheid ruling system. That's what they gave birth to.
excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt. It's 1:30. The official time for this event is 1:30. I personally have to leave. I have a meeting that I have to go to. But I would like to do is just formally end, give our panelists a round of applause. And I want to thank you all very much for coming. I thought it was a great discussion. Clearly needs to keep going. I'm hoping that our panelists can stay a few minutes if our audience would like to ask some questions personally. But thank you very much, and come to our next Black Bag event. Thank you.
He came into the lion's den and not teaching to